We all know the story of how Final Fantasy saved Squaresoft from bankruptcy and popularized the console RPG. We all hear in countless reviews and retrospectives about the robust and complete class system from Final Fantasy III, or the best villain in any RPG ever, Kefka, from Final Fantasy VI. This is Overlord Review, and today we're going to review Final Fantasy II.
After the success of the first entry, there were 400,000 copies produced. This was to ensure a sequel could be developed. At the time, there were no ideas about the sequel though. The first game saw Hironobu Sakaguchi as the main planner, but for the second installment, he became the game's director. The development team was bigger this time around, so first the story was crafted and then the new gameplay mechanics around it. The new leveling system was meant to be a realistic and more intense enhancement of the first game's system. The plot was penned by Hironobu Sakaguchi, while the actual scenario was written by Kenji Terada. The soundtrack was composed by Nobuo Uematsu, while the PlayStation, Game Boy Advance, and WonderSwan Color remakes were arranged by Tsuyoshi Sakido. Yoshitaka Amano was the concept artist again, returning from the first game, and the game was programmed again by Nasir Jabeli. Jabeli was required to return back to the USA after an expired work visa, so the Square team packed up enough equipment and followed him to America. The ironic part is that the game, finished in Sacramento, California, was never released to Western audiences. This time around, the team led by Sakaguchi gave players something different. The first game told of fairy tales about elves and crystals and spells, defeating elemental fiends and saving the world. Final Fantasy II changed that. It showed the effects of war to the best of its ability at the time. You are shown an empire that will poison the water, that will drop bombs on innocent towns, and kill whoever, no matter who it is. Oftentimes, when you meet new characters, they will be on their deathbed. This game was a more realistic take on the fantasy genre, a grittier and darker game compared to the light-hearted adventure. When you booted up this game, it looked like the first one, but you could feel there was something different. Final Fantasy II was released in Japan on December 17, 1988, to positive reception and rave reviews. Famitsu gave the game a 35 out of 40. Final Fantasy II was one of the highest rated games of 1988 behind Dragon Quest III. As of 2003, the original Famicom version sold over 800,000 copies. With all the re-releases, it has sold 1.28 million copies. game takes place in a world that was at peace till the evil Emperor of Palamencia sought total domination. The Emperor attacked the current monarch and wounded their army and sent them on retreat as newfound rebels. His armies killed and set fire to the town of Flynn and killed many villagers. 4 youths watched as their parents perish. The youths try to escape the ruined town. They are attacked by the Imperial army and almost killed when they are saved by the rebels. These children are Firion, Maria, Leon, and Guy. When Firion wakes up, he is in the new rebels' hideout, having just been brought back from the brink of death by a powerful mage named Minwu. After the main characters find each other and talk to the Princess Hilda, they discover Maria's brother is missing and might be a captive at the Castle Flynn. They offer their services to fight and exact revenge against the Empire. The princess declines them at first because of their age. They then go on to show their strength and power by sneaking into Flynn and receiving the dying confession of Prince Scott. With Firion leading, they end up doing acts of espionage, such as destroying a giant airship called the Dreadnought and fighting the evil Empire. They then go on to be leaders of the rebellion. The game has themes about death and the destruction of war. It also shows the self-sacrifice of those who are willing to protect some good that's
There is much of the gameplay from Final Fantasy returning, while there is also some new mechanics as well. Final Fantasy II works the same, with there being an explorable overworld with many vehicles. This was the first in the series to include the mascot, the Chocobo, as an animal used to explore the overworld faster. Final Fantasy II was also the first to introduce other series staples such as Cid, Dragoons, Leviathan, and Ultima Magic. There are random encounters in the overworld and in dungeons. There are several towns that you can access and talk with NPCs to further the story. There is a new feature where some characters will say a keyword, and this requires you to learn option. You can then use the ask option to get a response about that keyword. The game can now be saved in the overworld at any time, opposed to only at inns. The characters can now hold 2 one-handed weapons or a shield. There are also ranged weapons. Thanks to the new leveling system in Final Fantasy II, any character can become a master mage. The best way to describe the leveling system is by cooking. If you want to get really good at a recipe, then you cook the same recipe and get better every time. That's how leveling works in Final Fantasy II. You have experience points for everything individually instead of everything at once. You get HP experience when you are hit. That levels up the HP and defense. You have experience for every spell, so you gain points when you use it. And that goes for everything, including each weapon type and even evasion. Following the release and favorable reception of the Final Fantasy in North America in 1990, plans to release Final Fantasy II in the West began. Squaresoft, the North American branch of Square, began an English translation and conversion to the North American Nintendo systems. The game was publicized in several Square publications, and even a demo cartridge was created. The English version underwent long development, and the game itself was already 3 years old at the time. This was also right as the Super Nintendo was released with better graphics and more power. Square decided to scrap the project and instead translate the new Final Fantasy IV instead of 2. For Western audiences in the 90s, Final Fantasy II was actually Final Fantasy IV. Karu Moriyama, who was assigned to the original translation team, had this to say: "We had so very little memory capacity we could use for each game. It was never really translating, but chopping up information and sticking it back in. Additionally, our boss had no understanding about the work it took for an English version at the time." Final Fantasy II has had life on many different consoles, and even being almost 30 years old, has still enjoyed lots of success. The original was released in 1988 on Nintendo's Famicom, in Japan only. In 1994, the game was re-released with the first game with graphical updates. In 2001, the WonderSwan Color added new backgrounds and redrawn sprites. This was released in Japan only as well. Finally, in the West, in 2002, Final Fantasy Origins was released. This was a complete 2.5D remake on Sony's PlayStation 1. In 2004, we also got the Dawn of Souls for the Game Boy Advance. This was based on the WonderSwan Color port, with a few tweaks. There were 4 additional dungeons in the Souls of Rebirth content. In 2005, Japan got a mobile phone release, but in 2007, we got a PSP higher 2D resolution with remixed music and all the Dawn of Souls content. In 2009, Wii Virtual Console in Japan got it. In 2009, Origins on the PS Store was also released in Japan. It was released in 2012 in the US. In 2010, PSP port for iOS, and in 2012, the PSP port for Android. 2012, Japan also saw the 3DS Virtual Console version, and in 2013, the Wii U Virtual Console version. Thank you for watching my review of Final Fantasy II. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check out some of my other videos. Have a good day, YouTube.